Okay, Jez, so you've talked about the original state of being that we enter this world with, and you've talked about openings you had which gave you a taste of that being. But we clearly, most of us don't exist in that being. If we come into the world with it, we obviously lose this at some stage. How and when would you say we lose it?
No, how and when? Okay, when I think varies with different people, but certainly you can say in childhood. I think that the length of time that goes by before we lose it, some people it can be very quick and some people can delay that losing of it. But we're here to talk about the finding of it, the refinding of it. But in order to do that, we have to talk about and become conscious of the fact that, as you said, we once were living this being and the attributes of being, and that we lose those attributes. So how does it happen? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? You could also say, why does it happen, right? Let's deal with why first. We don't know. We can't know. You might as well say, why don't dogs fly? This is how it happens. What we got to do is deal with how it happens, learn from it, and go from there. This is what I did in my life. I recognized that I lost it. I recognized that it existed, this state, and this way of living. And I found it. So this is what's important as far as this inquiry is concerned. So let's go back to how we lose it. So it's a massive question, obviously, and we won't be able to go into everything here. But basically, we start in this experience of being in the natural state. And we come into this world and we come into this family. And the family is not existing in that same state unless everyone in that family were awake. The experience of the baby is of a family that is not in the same experience of life that it's in. So that's fine. So there's this weird mixture of like one experience of life, of the original state, butting up against an experience of people who've lost that. That doesn't mean there can't be love, of course. These people, the parents usually, thankfully, love the child. And that's the way life works. The child is loved, and in that love it grows and it learns about life through these parents who have had the experience of life that the baby hasn't had. It teaches it how this living as a human being thing works. But one aspect of what's passed on to that child is the loss of that state. It's a strange thing because it sounds, you could almost say it sounds cruel, but it's a bit like we can only teach what we know and what we are. I'm teaching you what I know. If I didn't know it, I couldn't teach it to you. The parents, all of us, learn to lose that state. And in the passing on of the knowledge of how to live as a human being, that is passed on. That's a general kind of level of what happens. Now, there's nothing malicious in it, of course. There's nothing, you can't even say it's bad or evil. It's you might say it's sad from a distance. You could say, what a shame we lose it. You could say, I remember the baby when she was ecstatically in joy, and now she's a fucked up teenager who's cutting herself or whatever. What happened? There's many expressions of suffering. So you might say it's sad, but on a kind of meta level, you can only say, this is what happens. What can we learn from it? So the next level you can go to of why this happens is, I would say this happens all through the kind of subject of love, basically. So as far as I'm concerned, the baby in that state is in a state of love. Now, on one level, we are all love. We're all expressing love. Even if you're in your most confused and hurt and suffering, as far as I'm concerned, we are love. We may not be in touch with it at that moment, but that's what we're made of. Okay, so the baby comes into this world as a very pure expression of that love. and is pure because it hasn't yet learned to lose the experience of that love, whereas the adults in the room and the parents, to greater or lesser degree, have. So there's this kind of dichotomy of love and love, sure, but a love that is in some way compromised. And that means there are moments in that life where that love is not lived or expressed. Now, sooner or later, despite the best intentions of every parent, and most parents, thankfully, do have that, that part of their lives, that lack of the experience, ongoing experience of love, will be expressed around the child. Now, and at first, that will not be a problem for the child, because the child is living in the natural state. It's orientated to its source. It's orientated to oneness, to the absolute level, to it. To love, with a capital L. And that orientation means that whatever happens out here in its experience in the world, in the perimeter of its life, won't affect that. It's already grounded in that love. Whereas the adults aren't. They've had that, but they've lost it. They're kind of anchored in something else. They're anchored in the personality, which is basically a loss of the ongoing experience of that love. So at first the child is protected by that connection. But as the child stays longer in the world, lives longer, something grows in it. And this is a natural process, which is what I would call the self. And the self is a vehicle that every child needs. We all need to operate in the world. So we start off unable to do anything for ourselves. We learn that we can grab something and pull it into our experience. And the self becomes this thing where it starts to be aware that it's not just everything, which is how we, at first the baby, there's no difference between the baby and everything else in the room. The oneness that we all are is just experienced. As the self develops, there's a consciousness that starts to realize that I'm in the hand that's reached out to grab the food, but I'm not in the food. On a meta level, I would say she is in the food. She's in everything. We're in everything. That's the oneness angle on it. But from the point of view of that self, it's not in it. So this thing called a self becomes defined the longer it stays in the world. And it learns that there's me and then there's mummy. And of course, a big part of this process is the naming of things. It learns that its name is Johnny. And that shape there is mummy. That what it started out as just an amorphous shape that came and fed it. And gradually it became mummy. So what happens in this process is there's a kind of migration from a connection to a direct connection to love, the love that's in everything, to a personalized version and connection to love through the mother, the father, perhaps the other family members. And what happens is the love that's received from the people, from the family, becomes a substitute for the love that it received just by being. So this is what happens. It's like a sort of migration from one perception of love to a kind of more finite, human, separate, relative version of love. So once again, nothing wrong with that. That's how it works. That's how it apparently works. And if the parents are loving, there's no problem in that. The baby can maintain that experience of being and that joy and that fulfilling relationship to life. But, as I said earlier, the moment comes when the baby experiences just one moment where the love of the parents is not being manifested. Now, there's many ways this can happen and it's different for everyone. But for example, a scenario, perhaps the parents have money worries and the father's lost his job and he's had a lot of stress at work. So obviously that's a very different experience of life than what the baby usually experiences. So he comes back, he's maybe angry, but the parents have an argument, they're upset. So this feeling of unconditional love that is normally coming to the baby suddenly bravery, it might be for a split moment, is not there. And this is a hell of a shock to the system of the baby, who, if you remember, is in full feeling engagement with life mode. Anything that happens, it totally feels it. And it experiences this lack of love, personal love. And that is what I call the wound.
Okay, thank you.